Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Hi everyone, it's my great pleasure to have Patrick McKeown on the line with us. Patrick is a fascinating and knowledgeable person from whom I think we can greatly learn and benefit. He's an international best-selling author of The Oxygen Advantage. It's a book that's near my bed and it's so used that it doesn't look like new anymore. I thumb through it all the time. He created and is the master instructor of the Oxygen Advantage technique. He is widely regarded as one of the world's leading breathing re-education experts. So Patrick, over the past 2 decades has trained thousands of people worldwide to safely challenge their bodies and produce positive changes through breathing re-education. I know that I'm working on it and I hope to learn much more, today. He teaches a new way to breathe, which combined with the specific exercises that are, designed to make our blood chemistry better. The result is an increase of oxygen flow to all of the body's systems, meaning greater endurance, strength, and power. We can learn so much from Patrick, and Patrick, I'm so delighted that you are here with us today. I do have to say that my exposure to you was not through the book, The Oxygen Advantage. It was from a book that you wrote called Close Your Mouth.
Wow, that's going back a long time.
It kind of hit me. I was intrigued by the title. I said, I got the book, and it was like, for me, it was a seismic shift. So it's been a few years now, and I have yet to spend a night without a little strip on my mouth since I read that book. It was a major, and then of course I read, The Oxygen Advantage. There is so much to talk about. I was also very fortunate to work, with Carl Stowe back in the 1980s. And so I've been prepped for that, but you really put it in focus. So I'd like to begin with Close Your Mouth and The Oxygen, Advantage. What made you write these books? How did it all start?
Yeah, it started because I came across all of this field because of my own health issues. I was a kid growing up. I had chronic nasal obstruction. I had chronic asthma. And typically, if you have a problem with your lungs, it's not just isolated to your lungs. And the nose is more likely to be stuffy. And anyone with a stuffy nose, you're twice as likely to have a sleep problem. So it's very normal. Sometimes we think of breathing as that breathing is isolated, but we have to consider the impact that poor breathing patterns can have on sleep. And then you bring in concentration, you bring in mental health, and you bring in resilience. And there is now, for the last 20, 30 years, a means of measuring that via heart rate variability. But the thing is, Adiel, I felt that when I started working in 2002, nobody was really interested in it. Healthcare professionals didn't really want to know about breathing through the nose. And I asked the question, what's the best way that I can get something into the hands of the general public? And it was by writing a book. So I wrote, the first book was Asthma-Free, Naturally. And that went pretty well. And it got published in the United States and it got published in the United Kingdom. And then I decided to write a little book called Close Your Mouth. And that was back in 2003, 2004. And then I wrote a few books afterwards. So I suppose Close Your Mouth was kind of a very short book. It's only about 140 pages. But it was enough to give people a synopsis into how to decongest their nose, to realize maybe a connection between the importance of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing. And then, of course, the Oxygen Advantage, it's at a different level. And I just finished a new book, but it won't be out for publication for a while. I submitted the manuscript there 2 weeks ago, and it's 140,000 words. And it's this is opening up new topics which we haven't covered in the Oxygen Advantage. For example, women's breathing. functional movement, the vagus nerve, and all this stuff. Like, the research is there. Children's sleep. I didn't cover that in the oxygen advantage. I kind of just touched on it mildly. It's not that I'm saying that the application of breathing exercises is a cure-all. It's not that. But if our breathing is off, it has many impacts.
Well, I can't wait for that book, with 140,000 words. I'm going to read every single one of them. I can assure you of that. And I've been working with people a lot about, the vagus nerves and many ways to, this is so fascinating. But let me ask you right away a very simple question. So one of the, the takeaways that's very useful is that at least at night, we can simply, we can put a little tape on our mouth that makes us breathe through the nose. Now, a lot of people will say, are you kidding? I'm going to choke. I'm going to die. I won't be able to breathe. My nose is all blocked. We'll talk about that too, but just a simple question. Many athletes use the Breathe Right strips. They make your nostrils flare just a little bit more. Wouldn't it be a good thing to do, you tape your mouth and you put this, the Breathe Right?
Yeah, you could do. The Breathe Right strips, typically we recommend it if somebody has a compromised nasal airway. And we have to remember this, that once we breathe through the nose will never be stuffy. Well, it can get slightly stuffy, but it will never become fully congested. And I know people can be a little bit apprehensive about mouth taping, but it's actually starting to get a lot of attention now. And there's different products on the market. And we brought out a product, and the part of the reason that we brought out a product was for children, because I feel for kids, and we know that 25 to 50% of studied children are persistently mouth breathing. And we also know that there's quite a lot of research showing that mouth breathing that's linking to sleep disorder breathing. If sleep disorder breathing, including snoring, is untreated by age 5, these kids have an increased risk of special education needs by 40%. Because of course, when we have a poor sleep, we wake up feeling lethargic, our productivity is affected, our mood is affected, but our brain is not developing, and it's the child's brain that's developing. I remember going to a talk by Christian Guilleminault. Sadly, he passed on maybe 12 months ago, but he was a Stanford-based medical doctor, a French doctor, and he coined the phrase obstructive sleep apnea. He came up with the term. And he also developed the apnea-hypopnea index. I remember in Bordeaux in 2016, he was talking at a conference, and he said that children's brains are getting fried. That was the words he used. He said, we need engineers, we need all of the professions, but as long as children are having sleep disorder breathing, their brains are getting fried. So here was I thinking, I'm working with children since 2002. We give them all of the exercises, but the thing that could, raise the biggest problem was, how do we get them out closed at night? So we come up with a tape that surrounds out and it brings the lips together. We call it myotape. So I think it's starting, with the research that's coming out there. I would say to any listener, if you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're likely to have a lighter sleep. You're much more at risk of obstructive sleep apnea. I could show a paper here that shows individuals with established obstructive sleep apnea. Basically, these individuals will snore heavy and then they stop breathing during their sleep due to collapse of the upper airways. And individuals with mouth breathing, the AHI index, which is apnea-hypopnea index, it was 52 events per hour. And the individuals who were breathing through their nose, it was 27 events per hour. Just by establishing nasal breath, just by the individuals breathing through the nose, they had almost half the AHI severity of mouth breathers. And unfortunately, Adiel, nobody or very few people is talking about nose breathing during sleep. I wrote a paper, a 10,000 word review article that was submitted to a medical journal this week, and it's been accepted for publication, because we have to show that there's a huge, if somebody is going around with their mouth open and fast breathing and upper chest breathing, and it's generally overlooked, that is going to impact our breathing during sleep, and it increases the risk of sleep apnea. And then we look at the impact of sleep apnea on conditions of civilization, not just the effect it's having on productivity, because I don't know how anybody can function if they don't have the concentration and energy levels, and we need a good night's sleep for that.
We do, and it's funny, I have been a messiah for you since I read your first book, and certainly recently. And out of all the people that I talk to, about this and breathing through the nose, the doctors are my worst, enemies. They say, "Come on, air is air. I'm breathing through my mouth. It doesn't make any difference." And just, you really need to. Luckily, a couple of them were willing to read an article or two. And now they turned, the corner. But just to show you, the thinking is, "Oh, come on, air is air." And we know that it's not.
Well, it's not quite as simple as that. Like, here's an anatomical model of the nose. And if you were to open up any medical textbook, and if you were to ask the question, what does the mouth do for breathing? And the answer is nothing, absolutely nothing. Because if you breathe through the mouth, that air goes straight down the throat. And if we look at the extent of the nasal cavity sitting above, so basically the roof of the mouth is the floor of the nose. And a lot of people don't realize that if you were to put your tongue into the roof of the mouth and drag your tongue all the way along the roof of the mouth until you feel the soft palate, well, sitting above the roof of your mouth is your nasal cavity. And if we look at the amount of real estate that is occupied in the skull by virtue of the nasal cavity, nature doesn't waste space. And that space is not there for the fun of it. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but this is coming back to Dr. Christian Guilleminault. So here we have the founding father of sleep medicine talking about, and I'll quote, "the critical importance of restoring nasal breathing both during wakefulness and sleep." The critical importance. And he didn't say just to breathe through your nose during sleep. He said breathe through your nose during wakefulness. But it takes 20 years for information to trickle down to general practitioner level. And by the time 20 years comes, I'll be well on my way past retirement. So I'm not sure what we're going to do, but I'm hoping that it speeds up, that, this work gets more awareness.
I hope so too. And the more you get exposed, and I'm very pleased to see that you do get a lot of, exposure and interview. The more you do, I think this is critical. I really think this is a huge thing. Now, we live in the San Francisco Bay Area here. And for the past month, we have had air that was really, we had a week, at least here where I live, where the air quality was almost the worst it can get. It was super dangerous for, everyone. And even if you locked yourself at home, it was there. So in a case like this, besides breathing through the nose, is there any other thing that you can do?
Well, we have to consider the volume of air that we're breathing. So I, as a mouth breather and as a kid with asthma, and many other people, because dysfunctional breathing is relatively common, that people can breathe more air than what they need. And if we consider that every breath that we take into the body, we're taking particulate matter. So if you are in a polluted environment, if you breathe more air, just by simple math, you're going to take in more pollution. Now, the point here is that your nose will filter it to some extent, but whatever your nose does, your mouth will do absolutely nothing. And the other aspect of it as well is that you can have individuals, if they are exposed to smoke, it will cause irritation of the lungs. They feel that their airways are narrowing, and as a result, then they feel they're not getting enough air. But unfortunately, then these individuals will tend to breathe more upper chest and faster because of the feeling of suffocation, but this in turn will feed back into their symptoms. So there is a way to breathe to enhance alveolar ventilation, but it's not by breathing up in chest, and it's not by breathing fast. And just simple math again, every breath that we take into the body, 150 milliliters of that air doesn't reach down into the small air sacs, because the last 150 milliliter of the air stays in dead space. So if you have an individual who's breathing fast and shallow, they could be breathing 20 breaths per minute. They could be taking a tidal volume where the size of each breath is 300 mil. So with dead space being 150, they are wasting 50% of the air that they are taking in. They are wasting it because of inefficient breathing. So unfortunately, and I was talking to a colleague in Portland, Oregon last night, and he said the same. He said, it's really dreadful. I didn't read the extent of the fires there, but nasal breathing and also more efficient breathing, and just being aware that if you are, like sometimes we have to voluntarily reduce the air that we are taking in. If I see a lot of dust matter or anything like that, I don't want to be taking that into my body. And you're so protective about our skin, but if we fully exposed our body to the atmosphere, the area of contact is about 2 meters squared. Now we have to bear in mind that every breath that we take into our body is coming from the atmosphere into the lungs. And the area of contact between the atmospheric air that we breathe in and our lungs is between 50 to 100 square meters. So our lungs are up to 50 times more exposed to the atmosphere than the skin. And the only organ that we have to deal with that air coming in is the nose. And this is not information. Back in 1988, researchers knew that the pressure of oxygen in the blood increased by 10% when individuals switched to nasal breathing. Nose breathing also is activating the diaphragm breathing muscle. The diaphragm breathing muscle is connected with the emotions. The diaphragm breathing muscle is also connected with the upper airway dilator muscles. And also we have a gas nitric oxide, which is sterilizing the air, opening up the airways, and playing a role for airway health. So it just doesn't make sense to have the mouth open.
So just in a way of daily procedure, your book gives excellent routines. And in fact, you even, divide them based on our board score, based on, okay. And you give very specific routines. But actually now I'm going to ask you about whether being unstructured will help, because some people look at a routine or an exercise with a certain name, breathe light to breathe right, and somehow I don't know, I don't even want to. But can we just be unstructured and in our daily life create many times where we stop, where we hold our breath, create minor air hunger, as you call it, medium, strong, without any structure throughout the day, because we can do it when we wait for the bus. Do you think
that's... Yeah, absolutely. Like any of your listeners who are listening to this, even if they just have the lips together, tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, focus on the airflow coming in and out of the nose, and just gently slow down the speed of the air coming into the nose. If they can slow down the speed of air coming into the nose, almost that their breathing is so smooth that the fine hairs within the nostrils do not move. So they're taking a very soft and slow breath in, and at the top of the breath, a total feeling of relaxation, to have a prolonged and relaxed exhalation. And then when you need to breathe in again, there's a very soft and slow, gentle breath in. So almost that you are hardly breathing at all, that your breathing is so soft and so slow that you're hardly taking any air into your nose. And then at the top of the breath, a total feeling of relaxation. And the objective would be to breathe maybe about 30% less air. And you're doing it correctly when we have air hunger. And air hunger, of course, signifies that's not necessarily due to a drop of oxygen, but it's an increase of carbon dioxide, because the primary stimulus to breathe is carbon dioxide. And the wonderful thing about carbon dioxide is when we expose our body to a little bit higher carbon dioxide and we have the air hunger, our blood vessels open up and more oxygen gets delivered throughout the body. And this is something that has been known since 1904. It's called the Bohr effect. In terms of the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen, it reduces in the presence of carbon dioxide. So basically, I would agree with you, Adiel. I think the best way to do this is bring it into our way of life. Gently soften the breath as it's coming in and out of the nose, and really slow it down and breathe a little bit less air. You don't necessarily have to hold your breath. You don't have to tense up the body. You're just softening the breath, and pay attention to the fingers. Do you notice that your hands are getting warmer? Because it's very common for people with poor breathing habits to have cold hands, cold feet, and to have brain fog. And if we consider 70,000 miles of blood vessels in the human body, And we can influence our blood circulation by how hard we breathe. And if we breathe too much air, our blood vessels constrict. And if we gently soften our breathing, not only are we opening up the blood vessels, not only do we increase oxygen delivery to the tissues and organs, but we also activate the body's relaxation response, because the prolonged and slow exhalation combined with high CO2 stimulates the vagus nerve. And this in turn then is causing a release of acetylcholine, and in turn then the heart rate is slowing as a result of that. And very often people have increased watery saliva in the mouth.
Right, that's a very telltale sign that you can.
Yes.
In fact, right in the last minute, I did exactly what you said. Right away, I have more saliva. So that's a good way to tell. But this, and by the way, all the yogic, for thousands of years, they talk about, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out is exactly what you said, of course. But I was saying, in addition to breathing slower, relaxed, and not with a big effort, it would be beneficial still from time to time to actually hold our breath to create that, air hunger, which does exactly what you just said.
Yes. Yeah. It can be, especially with physical exercise. So say, for example, how should people breathe when they go for a walk or go for a jog? Number one, it's all about in and out through the nose. And one professor in the United States, a Professor George Dallam, he's professor of sports science. I can't remember which university he's affiliated with, but he's now writing research papers on the change that happens when recreational athletes, switch from mouth to nose breathing. Number one, increased oxygen uptake, increased oxygen delivery to working muscles, reduced ventilation. So in other words, when individuals breathed through their nose during physical exercise, for 6 months, they had 22% less ventilation because of the training adaptations with nasal breathing. So, the human race, we like it, instant gratification. And what's more, today is a total instant gratification. But when we switch to nasal breathing, it's a little bit tougher at the start, especially during physical exercise, because of the resistance that the nose imposes on our breathing. But that resistance is beneficial in terms of oxygen transfer from the lungs to the blood, and also flow states of the mind. So with nasal breathing, and this has been known since 1991, if you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, you achieve a better flow state whereby the mind is in a state of relaxation and alertness at the same time. And oftentimes that's a coveted state that people wonder, how can you replicate it? Nose breathing would be the very good step in terms of that direction. So I would say breath holding, very useful. You're going for your walk. If you don't suffer from high blood pressure, and if you're not pregnant, if you don't have any kind of serious medical conditions, as you're walking, after a few paces, take a normal breath in and out through your nose. Just hold your breath, or if your hands are clean because of COVID, hold your nose and walk 15, 20 to 25, 30 paces holding your breath, and build up a medium to strong air hunger, and then let go and breathe in through your nose. And the thing about this is that when you do a breath hold like that, it increases blood flow to the brain. You're more alert. It adds an extra load onto the breathing muscles. It opens up your nose. So anybody with a stuffy nose, it's a great way of decongesting the nose. And anybody with asthma, it's a great way of helping to open up the airways.
So I actually tried, and I did implement it. Right next to where I live is a very steep mountain that I hike on. And I like to go strong. And I went with a friend. And my friend was very, very, ambitious. And I was determined, was not gonna hike so that I can't breathe just through my nose. So we came to a point, my friend says, you're holding me back. I said, I know, but I'm not gonna walk any faster. So they walked fast. I finished, the whole thing, but I never breathed through my mouth. So, you kind of build up to it, right?
Yes, it is. And generally it takes a few weeks to make those adaptations. So I would say to people, just be patient with it. When you look at the benefits of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, no comparison. Like, people are going for a run with their mouth open. They're drying out the mouth. they have poor dental health, they're traumatizing the upper airways, they're causing moisture to be sucked out of the lower airways. This is contributing to exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. But mouth breathing is chest and fast breathing. Reduced oxygen uptake, reduced oxygen delivery, and a greater fraction of expired oxygen. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
When I'm listening to you, I'm starting to ask myself if when you run and you breathe through your mouth only, are you increasing, the benefits to your body or maybe not? I mean, because people say it's very good to run. But I have a question to you, from a philosophical viewpoint, we have a lot of talk about, intermittent fasting. And it's become pretty clear that we tend to eat more than we need, we fast a little more. Now it carries over to breathing. It seems like almost a theme in everything we do. We've grown to take in more than we really need.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, very much. And you spoke about yoga. People often practice yoga, and in a yoga studio, it should be that we shouldn't hear anybody breathing. That's the rule of thumb. And if we break it down, when we look at breathing, we need to look at breathing from a biochemical point of view, which is carbon dioxide, a biomechanical point of view, which is focused on breathing low, and then also resonant frequency, which is the 5.5, 6 breaths per minute that you spoke about. And there was a woman from Seattle who, she was a yoga instructor. She's a yoga instructor for about 30 years. Her name is Robin Rottenberg. And she developed chronic fatigue, and she developed, I think it was obstructive sleep apnea. So she came across Breathe Light. And then she started researching back to the sutras. And what did the yogi say? The yogi said that your breath should be so subtle. And then we think about it, how is yoga being taught today? The yogi back then, when it was developed, spoke about that the breath should never be hard, that the breath should be light. And now she's brought that in, and she's written a book on it since. So modern way of living, it's all about being, the bigger the better. Whereas with breathing, less is more.
This is really a great thing for us to learn. Now, you mentioned and you talk about when we are talking right now, you and I are speaking. Well, when people speak in general, especially on a stage, they're very focused on the content. So since they are exhaling through the mouth, because they're speaking, I am exhaling, but can it be taught? And I have a feeling that you're doing it. You speak a lot. You're speaking right now. You speak a lot. Can you speak and yet take the air in through your nose at the same time?
Yeah, it's in terms of having a cadence of proper talk, it's not easy. There's times I'm going to mouth breathe, and there's times I'm going to nose breathe. For instance, if I was really to do it correctly, I would talk, and then I will pause to breathe in. And then I will talk. And, if I was giving a lecture like that, everybody would be asleep in about 15 to 20 minutes. So I have to consider that there's a rule of thumb that I have with speaking. I never want to hear my breathing. And if I start to hear my breathing, it's time to stop speaking. And the other thing, just as you mentioned about this, how many people talk for a living? And at the end of the day, they are absolutely exhausted. And people don't put together the equation that talking is increasing the respiratory rate, is increasing tidal volume. We breathe more air. And as we breathe more air, blood vessels are constricting and the brain is getting less oxygen. And that's contributing to fatigue.
Okay, so let's say that you just gave a lecture, you spoke on another lecture, you interviewed with me, you interviewed on BBC, it's the end of the day, you are shot and you breathe through your mouth because of what you said. Can you do a fix? Can you fix it later? Can you get yourself to a state that will at least give you the best benefit following a day like that?
Yes. In terms of number one, never have the mouth open during sleep. And I've seen professional singers, and you think about, professional singers are so dependent on their upper airways, and they're using their vocal cords during the day. They're exercising, the vocal cords, and then they go to sleep at night, and at least 50% of people over 40 years of age are mouth breathing during their sleep, or at least people over 40 years of age are 6 times more likely to spend at least 50% of their time mouth breathing. So once we hit 40, now I'm not saying that it doesn't happen with earlier people, younger people, it does, but you think of that professional singer. They're exercising their vocal cords during the day, and then they are breathing hard through their mouth and traumatizing the upper airways at night. It's crazy. So we really need to be protecting. And in terms of speaking, it's all about conservation of breath. And if we breathe, too hard and too fast, it can put us into that fight or flight response. The heart rate is elevating, we're getting traumatized, we're getting anxious, and it can contribute to stage fright. And this is possibly the reason that behind the backstage, that people had brown paper bags, that if somebody did get stage fright, they would breathe in and out of it to replenish carbon dioxide levels. So, for musicians, for people who are talking for a living, it's very important that their breath is conserved. And we often hear about the opera singer. They place the candle frame in front of their in front of their face. And the opera singer was to sing, but to conserve their breath so they didn't blow out the flame. And that's correct.
So one of the people we're going to have on this show is a voice coach from Los Angeles called Roger Love. And I work with Roger. He's a great guy. He works with some of the top singers and speakers. Roger always says, when you do my singing exercises, my voice warm-up exercises, and when you sing, you sing out through your mouth, but only breathing through the nose because the vocal cords get dried out.
Yes.
So that's another.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with him. It would be very interesting for Roger to know about Bolt score and the Bolt test, because that will tell you efficiency of breathing. And you need pretty much any singer to have a Bolt score of at least 25 seconds. Because if you have a person with a Bolt score of 10 seconds, they're breathing fast, they're breathing shallow, they're already breathing inefficiently. And we have to consider how you breathe during singing is how you breathe during the day. And if your everyday breathing is off, and if that singer is walking down the street with their mouth open and sleeping with their mouth open and having their mouth open while they're watching television, well, then their breathing is not going to suddenly correct itself during singing. So for sports, for sleep, we have to consider, and for singing, of course, our everyday breathing pattern.
I'm going to ask you a very small and technical question, very, very small. In many of the exercises, even now, you said, you walk and then 5 steps to start with and pinch your nose. Okay, my question is this. Why pinch the nose? How about I walk around, then I say, okay, I'm holding my breath. I'm holding it. Here are my hands. Why do you have to pinch the nose? I was wondering about that.
It's just a comfort. It's a comfort. It's actually, we use it, I suppose, people more so with panic disorder, people with asthma, people who had labored breathing, that I didn't want to give them added stress by getting them to lock their throat muscles or tense their throat to hold their breath, that we did it just as a comfort to hold their nose. And I know now with COVID, everything has changed, that we shouldn't be really touching our nose anyway. So, and even with COVID, of course, nose breathing, we never hear anybody talking about it.
Nitric oxide, everything. I mean, excuse me, it comes through the nose.
Yeah, absolutely. Antiviral, the only gas in terms of the human airways and it's not manufactured in the mouth. So this gas, nitric oxide, is not produced in the mouth. It's only produced in the nose, and the gas is antiviral. Now, I'm not saying that nasal breathing is going to stop COVID, but again, it's coming back to the one thing. And I wrote about this back in March, and then luckily somebody has written a paper that was published in a scientific journal, and they spoke about the importance of nasal breathing to harness nasal nitric oxide. But they also said this: taping of the mouth during sleep may reduce viral load, and it's giving the immune system sufficient time to mount an adequate response. And here's the other thing, Adiel. If somebody is infected, it's likely that they are going to mouth breathe because they're feeling fast and their breathing is labored. So you have somebody, maybe a family member, if they're unfortunate enough to be infected with COVID, and then they are unwittingly and unknowingly breathing through an open mouth, 42% greater water loss going into the atmosphere. That's why singing, and I heard of one choir in Holland, one person was infected, and there was a large group of people in that choir, and everybody got infected. So you can imagine singing, that there's a lot of water vapor, particles emitted over a period of time, and the viral load was just too much.
Thank you for joining me today. For more videos, be sure to follow me on Facebook. Got a question? I love questions. Leave it in the comment right below.